Happy Sabbath. This weekend is also Easter, so I say to each of you, Happy Easter. Tonight, I pray that the Lord continue to bless you, protect you, and give you peace, joy, and love. And may His presence be here tonight as we're going to study His words. Tonight, I'm going to skip the chapter from Christ's object lesson, and I'm going to tell you the story of Good Friday. And this story is based on the Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. 2,000 some years ago, on this night, the Good Friday night, Jesus was walking with His disciples. They were slowly making their way to the Garden of Gethsemane. On the sky, there was full moon, the Passover moon. This is the Passover weekend. And everywhere was quiet. The pilgrims, they all returned back to the tents to rest. Well, prior to this, Jesus was conversing with His disciples. He was also teaching them many things. But as He got nearer to the Garden of Gethsemane, He became strangely silent. He had often visited this spot for meditation and prayers before, but never with a heart so full of sorrow as on this night. Throughout His life on earth, He walked in the light of God's presence. Whenever He's in conflict with men who are inspired by Satan, He would say, "He that sent me is with me. The Father hath not left me alone, for I do always those things that please Him." But now, He seemed to be shut out from the light of God's sustaining presence. And now, He is one of the sinners. The guilt of fallen humanity He must bear. On Him who knew no sin has to bear these iniquities of us all. And this sin so dreadful for Him. He tempted to afraid that He would be barred from God's presence forever. He felt so terrible. He could feel the wrath of God. And He exclaimed, He said, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even unto death." As they got closer to the garden, the disciples see that His face, they see the face of the Master. They see that He was extremely sad. And as He walked, His form, His physical form swayed as if He is about to fall. But yet they dare not question Him of the cause. And they even have to support Him. If they didn't support Him, He would have fallen to the ground. And He was moaning and groaning aloud, as if He's really suffering from a physical, heavy, terrible burden. As they enter the garden, Jesus left all the other disciples except 3. He told the other disciples that they should pray for themselves and they should pray for Him. And with Peter, James, and John, He entered the Garden of Gethsemane. These 3 disciples were Jesus' closest companion. They were with Him in the Mount of Transfiguration. They saw Moses, they saw Elijah talking with Jesus. And they had heard the voice from heaven. And now they also witnessed Jesus' struggle. Jesus wants them to be close to him. This spot where they are at, they often spend time with Jesus. They often meditate upon God's word, and they would pray. And then they go to rest. They would sleep undisturbed at a little distance from their master. They would sleep there until Jesus waked them in the morning to go to work again. And now Jesus wants them to spend the night with him in prayer. And yet, he couldn't bear the fact that they could see his agony, to see what he had to endure. So he told them, "Tarry ye here," he said, "and watch with me." So he went a little distance away from them, but not so far that they couldn't see him or couldn't hear him. And he fell prostrate upon the ground. He felt the gulf between him and the Father was so broad, so black, so deep. And he trembled. The agony, this agony, he cannot use his power to escape. As a man, he had to suffer the consequence of sin, of man's sin. As a man, he has to endure the wrath of God against transgression. Christ is now standing in a different position than he had ever before. His suffering can best described by the prophet Zechariah. Zechariah said, "Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, and against the man that is my fellow, saith the Lord of hosts." As the substitute and surety for sinful men, Christ was suffering under divine justice. He saw what justice meant. Prior to this, he always interceded for man, for his disciple, for the multitude, for mankind. But now he longed for someone to intercede for himself. As Christ felt his unity with the Father was broken up, he was so afraid that in his human form, in his human nature, he wouldn't be able to endure what's coming up, what is about to happen. You know, in the wilderness, when he was tempted by Satan, the destiny of human race was also at stake. But he came out a conqueror. He was victorious. But now the tempter come again. Tempter Satan come again. And he would come for this last struggle. For this, Satan has been preparing for the last 3 years during Jesus' ministry. Everything was at stake now. If Satan failed here, his hope of mastery is gone. The kingdom of the world will finally become Christ, and he himself will be overthrown and cast out. But if he overcome Christ, the world will become his, and human race will forever be in his power. So this is the issues of the conflict before Christ. Christ's soul was full of dread, the dread of separation from God. And Satan, at this point, when Jesus' weakest point, told Jesus that if you do this, if you bear the sin of the world, you will be separated with God the Father forever. And you would belong to my kingdom. And you would never become one with God again. And furthermore, Satan told him, "What have you to gain by this sacrifice? Look at man, they are hopeless. They are guilty. Even you sacrifice yourself for them, they are not going to thank you. And furthermore, he told them, look at your people. Look at this nation, holy nation. They have all the advantages from you. You gave them temporal advantages. You gave them spiritual, advantages. Look, they rejected you. They even seek to destroy you. You are their foundation. You are the center. You are the seal of the promises. But they don't want you. And one of your own disciples, he betrayed you. And your most zealous followers, they will all eventually abandon you. Christ abhorred at all these thoughts, that this insinuation by Satan, that whom he had undertaken to save, and all those whom he loved so much would unite with the plots of Satan. And this pierced his soul. The conflict was terrible. The heaviness weighed upon him. The heaviness of this nation. The heaviness of his betrayer. The heaviness of his accuser. And the heaviness of the sin of the world was on him. And this heaviness was crushing out his life. In his agony, Christ clung to the cold floor, as if he clinging onto it would prevent him from drawing further away from God the Father. And he cried out. He said, "Oh, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." Yet even now he adds, "Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." Human hearts long for sympathy when they are suffering. This longing Christ felt to his very core. He wants sympathy from his close companion. These 3 friends of his, he often blessed them. He often comforted them when they were in distress. He often protected them. He often prayed for them. And now he is suffering from this superhuman agony. He wants to know that they are praying for him and praying for themselves, because they will have to endure temptation as well. Well, Jesus, think of the world. Think of if he were to escape this sacrifice, how terrible the human race would have to endure this malignity of sin. Jesus got up from where he was with painful effort, and he staggered to the place where he left his 3 disciples. But he found them asleep. Had he found them praying, he would have been relieved, because if they were seeking refuge in God, satanic agent would not prevail over them, and he would have been comforted by their steadfast faith. But no, they were sleeping. But they did pray, though, when they heard Jesus crying out to God. They did not intend to forsake their master. But then they seemed to be paralyzed by sleepiness, and they couldn't keep their eyes open to continue to pray. And they didn't realize the importance of prayer, steadfastness of prayer and watchfulness, because they would have to endure temptation. what kind of temptation they have to endure? Remember a few hours before, Jesus told them, all ye shall be offended because of me this night. All of them had given him the strongest assurance that they would go with him to prison, even to death. And poor, self-sufficient Peter added, although all shall be offended, yet will not I. But the disciples, they trusted themselves. They did not look to the mighty helper as Christ had counseled them to do. So at this time when Christ needed them the most, needed their prayers, they were found asleep. Even Peter was sleeping. And John, the loving disciple who leaned on the breast of Jesus, was asleep. Surely the love of John for his master should have kept him awake. His earnest prayer should have mingled with those of his loving Savior in the time of Jesus' supreme sorrow. The Redeemer has spent the entire night praying, not for himself, but for his disciples, that their faith would not fail. Should Jesus now put to James and John the question he had once asked, are you able to drink the cup that I shall drink of, and to be baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized with? They probably wouldn't dare to say, we are able. The disciples were awakened by the voice of Jesus, and they looked at his face. Jesus was changed. His face was filled with agony. His face was changed because of this extreme stress. And Peter heard Jesus talk to him. Jesus said, Simon, sleepest thou? Couldst not thou watch 1 hour? Watch ye and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. The spirit truly is ready, but the flesh is weak. At this point, Jesus still feels sorry for his disciple. He was so worried about them. He worried that they would not be able to endure the test that would come upon them at his betrayal and death. He didn't scold them, but only said, watch ye and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. He said this even while he was suffering, while he was in agony. He excused their weakness. He said the spirit truly is ready, but the flesh is weak. Again, Jesus staggered back to the place of his former struggle. He was filled with superhuman agony, and he poured out his soul to God again. The Bible said his sweat was as if it were great drops of blood falling down to the ground. The trees were silent witnesses of his anguish. From their leaves, the branches dropped heavy dew on his stricken form, as if the nature was weeping over its author, who is wrestling alone in the darkness. A short time before that, Jesus stood strong like a mighty cedar before Pilate, before the high priest. He stood forth in like divine majesty as the Son of God. But now he's like a broken reed, bent by the angry storm. He prayed, O my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. he prayed this prayer again. 3 times Christ made that prayer, and his decision is made. He will save man at any cost to himself. He will accept the baptism of blood so that through him, perishing millions may gain everlasting life. He has left the court of heavens where all is pure, all is happy, all is glorious, to even save one lost sheep. The one world that has fallen by sin. And he will not turn from his mission, and he will become the propitiation for the race that will themselves to sin. His prayer now is breathed with the only submission. He prayed, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. He made the decision. He made the decision to sacrifice himself for us all. Happy Good Friday. Happy Easter.